She said she loved me. Her voice, a breathy whisper against my ear in the dimly lit corner of the bar. The music throbbed, a heartbeat mimicking the frantic rhythm in my chest. Elena. Just the sound of her name, even now, years later, can conjure the phantom warmth of her hand in mine, the scent of her perfume, something floral and faintly intoxicating, clinging to my clothes. That night, the bar hummed with Friday night energy, a collective exhale of relief from the week's grind. But for me, it was more than just Friday. It was Elena night. Every Friday, or so it had become, was Elena night. We'd met at a gallery opening, a pretentious affair filled with more wine than actual art appreciation. I'd been dragged there by a friend, reluctantly shedding my usual jeans and t-shirt for something marginally less offensive. Elena, however, seemed to belong there. She moved through the crowd with an effortless grace, her laughter a melodic chime that cut through the low murmur of conversation. She was striking, undeniably beautiful, with eyes the color of warm honey and hair that cascaded down her back like liquid night. I, on the other hand, felt like an awkward imposter, a misplaced puzzle piece in a sophisticated tableau. Yet somehow, our eyes met, and she smiled. Not just a polite, fleeting smile, but a genuine, radiant smile that seemed to focus solely on me, as if I were the only person in the room. It was disarming, captivating. We talked for hours that night, or at least it felt like hours. Time seemed to warp and bend around her presence. She spoke with passion about art, about literature, about life, her words painting vivid pictures in my mind. I, usually reticent and reserved, found myself opening up to her, sharing thoughts and feelings I rarely voiced to anyone. She listened intently, her gaze never wavering, making me feel seen, truly seen, for the first time in a long time. That night, I walked her home, the city lights blurring around us as we talked. At her doorstep, she turned to me, her smile softening, and said, "I had a wonderful time, Michael." My name, spoken in her voice, sounded like poetry. "Me too," I managed to stammer, feeling a blush creep up my neck. And then she leaned in and kissed me. It was a brief kiss, chaste almost, but it sent a jolt of electricity through me, leaving me breathless and wanting more. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. We went on dates, dinners, movies, walks in the park. Each time I fell deeper under her spell. She was everything I thought I wanted, everything I hadn't dared to hope for. She was intelligent, witty, beautiful, and seemingly genuinely interested in me. She asked about my work, my hobbies, my family. She remembered the small details I told her, the things most people would forget. She made me feel special, important, and she said she loved me. That night in the bar, the words hung in the air, shimmering like precious jewels. "I love you, Michael," she repeated, her eyes searching mine, as if seeking confirmation, reassurance. And I, completely and utterly enamored, said it back. "I love you too, Elena." The words felt right, true, even though it all seemed too good to be true. And maybe, deep down, a tiny nagging voice whispered that it was. But I pushed it away, ignored it, blinded by the dazzling light of Elena's affection. I wanted to believe it. I needed to believe it. Because for the first time in my life, I felt like I had found something real, something meaningful, something that could last. Or so I thought. The music in the bar swelled again, pulling me back to the present moment. Elena was still looking at me, her expression a mixture of tenderness and something else, something I couldn't quite decipher. But in that moment, in the haze of alcohol and infatuation, I didn't question it. I just held her hand tighter, my heart overflowing with a love that felt both exhilarating and terrifyingly fragile. Fragile, because even then, even in the midst of my happiness, a subtle unease lingered, a faint tremor beneath the surface of our seemingly perfect romance. A tremor that, with each passing day, would grow stronger, more insistent, until it shattered everything I thought I knew about Elena and about myself. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly. Little things, easily dismissed, easily explained away. But in retrospect, they were the first cracks in the facade, the initial whispers of a truth I was too blinded by love to hear. It began with her questions, seemingly innocent, casual inquiries, woven seamlessly into our conversations. "Tell me more about your family, Michael," she'd say, her voice laced with genuine curiosity. And I would, readily, eagerly. I told her about my parents, their quiet, steadfast love for each other, their unwavering support for me and my brother. And then, inevitably, the conversation would drift towards Alex. My brother, Alex. Older by 2 years, and in many ways, my opposite. Where I was introverted and bookish, Alex was outgoing and charismatic. Where I was content with quiet evenings at home, Alex thrived in the spotlight, surrounded by friends and admirers. He was effortlessly charming, naturally gifted, and seemed to glide through life with an ease I could only envy. And Elena was fascinated by him. Not in an overtly flirtatious way, at least not initially, but her questions about Alex were persistent, probing. "What does Alex do?" she'd ask. "Is he seeing anyone? What's he like?" I answered her questions readily, perhaps too readily, proudly. Alex was my brother, after all. I loved him, admired him, even if sometimes I also felt a pang of inadequacy in his shadow. I told her about Alex's successful career in finance, his impressive apartment in the city, his adventurous spirit, his wide circle of friends. I painted a picture of a man who was everything I was not: confident, successful, desirable. And Elena listened, her eyes wide with what I interpreted as admiration for my brother, vicarious excitement through me. But there was something else in her gaze, something I couldn't quite place. A flicker of something that wasn't just admiration, perhaps something more akin to calculation. But I dismissed it, attributed it to my own insecurities, my tendency to overthink things. Elena was interested in my family, in me. That's all it was, wasn't it? Then there were the coincidences, chance encounters that started to feel less and less like chance. We'd be walking down the street and suddenly, "Oh, Michael, isn't that your brother?" And there he would be, Alex, seemingly appearing out of nowhere. At first, it was infrequent, maybe once or twice a month. But gradually, the coincidences became more frequent, more predictable. It was always the same scenario. Elena would spot Alex first, her eyes lighting up with surprise and delight. She'd call out his name, her voice a little too loud, a little too eager. And Alex, ever the charmer, would stop and greet us, his smile warm and genuine. He was always friendly, always gracious to Elena, but there was a subtle reserve in his interactions with her, a polite distance that I, in my naivete, didn't fully understand. He'd ask about our relationship, offer congratulations, and then politely excuse himself, citing prior engagements or pressing deadlines. These encounters were always brief, fleeting. But they were enough for Elena, enough for her to exchange a few words with Alex, to bask in his presence, however briefly. And after each encounter, she'd be strangely energized. Her eyes would sparkle, her cheeks would flush, and she'd be even more affectionate towards me, showering me with compliments and attention. It was as if seeing Alex, even for a few minutes, recharged her, fueled her interest in me, and I, oblivious to the undercurrents swirling beneath the surface, basked in her renewed affection, mistaking it for genuine love, for confirmation of our growing bond. I didn't see the pattern. I didn't recognize the subtle shifts in her behavior. I was too caught up in the illusion of happiness she so expertly crafted, too blinded by the love I thought she felt for me. And Alex? He seemed wary. Each time we ran into him with Elena, I noticed a subtle tightening around his eyes, a fleeting shadow crossing his face. He never said anything directly, but his body language, his restrained demeanor, hinted at an unspoken unease. But again, I dismissed it. Alex was always a bit guarded, a bit reserved. It was just his personality, or so I told myself. The truth, however, was slowly, insidiously, starting to seep into my consciousness, like a slow leak, dripping drop by drop, eroding the foundations of my blissful ignorance. And the next drop, the one that would finally break the dam, came in the form of a seemingly innocuous invitation. It was Elena who suggested it, of course. "Why don't we all go out for dinner sometime?" she proposed one evening, her voice casual, almost offhand. "You, me, and Alex. It would be fun." Fun. The word echoed in my mind, tinged with a subtle dissonance. Fun for whom? For me? Yes, I suppose. Spending time with Elena was always fun. For Alex? Maybe. He was always up for a good meal. But for Elena? That was the question. I hesitated for a moment, a flicker of unease stirring within me. "Sure," I said, trying to sound enthusiastic. "That sounds nice." Nice. Another lukewarm word. Elena smiled, a bright, almost too bright smile. "Great, I'll organize it. Leave it to me." And she did. She took charge, as she always did. She chose the restaurant, a trendy upscale place that was definitely beyond my usual budget. She made the reservation, specifying a time that conveniently coincided with Alex's usual after-work hours. And she kept reminding me about it in the days leading up to the dinner, her enthusiasm bordering on obsessive. "Are you excited about dinner with Alex?" she'd ask, her eyes sparkling. "It'll be so great to all hang out together." "Yeah," I'd reply, forcing a smile. "Great." But inside, the unease was growing, solidifying into a knot of anxiety in my stomach. Why was she so fixated on this dinner with Alex? Why was she making such a big deal out of it? Was it really just about hanging out? Or was there something more to it? The night of the dinner arrived, and I felt a strange mix of anticipation and dread. I picked Elena up from her apartment, and she looked stunning. She was wearing a new dress, a sleek figure-hugging number that showed off her curves to perfection. She'd spent extra time on her hair and makeup, radiating an air of polished glamour that was even more pronounced than usual. It felt calculated, like she was dressing for someone, and that someone wasn't me. We arrived at the restaurant and were shown to our table. Elena was animated, chatty, her energy almost manic. She kept glancing towards the entrance as if expecting someone to arrive. And then, he did. Alex walked in, looking effortlessly handsome in a tailored suit. He spotted us and made his way over to our table, his smile warm and genuine. "Hey guys, Sorry I'm late. Traffic was a nightmare, he said, pulling out a chair and sitting down. No problem, Elena said quickly, her voice a little too high-pitched. We just got here ourselves. I watched them interact, observing every nuance, every subtle gesture. Elena was different around Alex. Her usual playful banter became flirtatious. Her casual touches became lingering. She leaned closer to him when she spoke, her laughter louder, more attention-seeking. And Alex? He was polite, charming, as always. But there was a distinct coolness in his demeanor towards Elena. A subtle distance he maintained, despite her obvious efforts to engage him. He directed most of his conversation towards me, asking about my work, my life, seemingly oblivious to Elena's attempts to draw his attention. But Elena persisted. She steered the conversation towards topics she knew would interest Alex. Finance, travel, current events. She peppered him with questions, hanging on his every word, her gaze fixed on him with an intensity that made me increasingly uncomfortable. I felt like a third wheel, an unwelcome intruder in a private conversation between Elena and my brother. My voice seemed to fade into the background, my attempts to participate met with distracted nods or perfunctory responses. The dinner stretched on, an agonizingly slow descent into awkwardness and unease. Elena continued to flirt with Alex, her efforts becoming more blatant, more desperate. And Alex continued to deflect her advances, his politeness masking a growing discomfort. I watched it all unfold, a sickening realization dawning in my mind. Elena wasn't interested in me. Not really. She was interested in Alex. I was just a stepping stone, a way to get closer to him. The thought hit me like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of me. The love I thought she felt for me, the affection, the intimacy, it was all a lie. A carefully constructed performance designed to manipulate me, to use me. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me, followed by a burning anger. How could she? How could she be so deceitful, so cruel? I looked at Elena, really looked at her, and saw her for the first time without the rose-tinted glasses of infatuation. And what I saw was not the beautiful, enchanting woman I had fallen in love with, but a calculating, manipulative user. The realization was devastating, shattering the illusion of happiness I had so desperately clung to. And in that moment, amidst the clatter of cutlery and the murmur of conversations in the restaurant, I knew that everything had changed. Everything was about to unravel, and I was about to confront the painful truth that lay hidden beneath the surface of Elena's carefully crafted deception. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. I barely tasted the food, my appetite completely gone. I mumbled responses to questions, my mind racing, trying to process the devastating realization that had just hit me. Elena, oblivious to my inner turmoil, continued her relentless pursuit of Alex, her flirtations becoming increasingly obvious, almost embarrassingly so. Alex, to his credit, remained remarkably composed, but I could see the strain in his eyes, the tightening of his jaw. He was clearly uncomfortable, but he was too polite to directly address Elena's inappropriate behavior. He tried to steer the conversation back to me, asking about my work, my hobbies, anything to deflect Elena's attention. But she wouldn't be deterred. She kept finding ways to interject, to bring the focus back to Alex, to steer the conversation in a direction that allowed her to flirt with him, to compliment him, to subtly touch his arm or his hand. It was excruciating to watch. And the worst part was, I knew, with a chilling certainty, that Alex was aware of what was happening. He wasn't naive. He wasn't oblivious. He saw Elena's intentions, and he was rejecting them, subtly but firmly. And yet, Elena persisted. Driven by what? Desperation? Obsession? I couldn't fathom it. Finally, mercifully, the dinner came to an end. Alex excused himself, claiming an early start the next day. He shook my hand, his grip firm, his eyes meeting mine for a brief, meaningful moment. There was something in his gaze, a flicker of sympathy, perhaps even apology. And then he turned to Elena, offering a polite but distant farewell. "It was nice meeting you, Elena," he said, his voice cool, professional. "Perhaps we'll run into each other again sometime." "Yes," Elena said eagerly, her voice a little too loud. "That would be great." She watched him walk away, her eyes lingering on his retreating figure. And then she turned back to me, her smile faltering slightly. "Well," she said, her voice losing some of its earlier enthusiasm, "that was fun." Fun. The word again, echoing hollowly in the air. "Yeah," I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. "Fun." The ride home was silent, tense. Elena seemed to sense a shift in my mood, a change in the dynamic between us. She tried to make conversation, asking about my day, my work, but her voice lacked its usual warmth, its usual enthusiasm. I gave short, monosyllabic answers, my gaze fixed out the window, watching the city lights blur past. When we reached her apartment, she turned to me, her expression uncertain. "Are you okay, Michael?" she asked, her voice hesitant. "Yeah," I said, my voice still flat. "I'm fine." Liar. I was anything but fine. I was seething with anger, hurt, betrayal. But I couldn't bring myself to confront her yet. Not in that moment. I needed time to process, to gather my thoughts, to decide what to do. "Good night, Elena," I said, my voice cold, distant. "Good night, Michael," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. She leaned in for a kiss, but I turned my head, avoiding her lips. She hesitated for a moment, her eyes widening in surprise, and then she stepped back, her face paling slightly. I turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone on her doorstep. As I drove home, the anger intensified, consuming me, the lies, the deception, the manipulation. It all swirled in my mind, a toxic cocktail of emotions. I replayed the past few months in my head, seeing everything in a new light, recognizing the subtle signs I had ignored, the red flags I had dismissed. Elena's constant questions about Alex, the coincidental encounters, her obsessive focus on arranging the dinner. It all made sense now. It was all part of her plan. A calculated, manipulative plan to get closer to my brother. And I had been a fool, a naive, gullible fool, to fall for it. I parked the car and walked into my apartment, the silence amplifying the turmoil within me. I paced back and forth, restlessly, unable to sit still. I wanted to scream, to shout, to break things, but instead, I picked up my phone and dialed Alex's number. It rang a few times and then he answered, his voice tired, subdued. "Hey, Michael," he said. "Hey, Alex," I replied, my voice trembling slightly. "Can we talk?" "Yeah, sure," he said, his tone cautious. "What's up?" And then the dam broke. The words poured out of me, a torrent of anger, hurt, and betrayal. I told him everything about Elena, about her constant questions about him, about the coincidences, about the dinner, about my realization that she wasn't interested in me, that she was only after him. I spoke rapidly, breathlessly, my voice cracking with emotion. And Alex listened. He listened patiently, silently, without interrupting. When I finally finished, there was a long pause, then Alex spoke, his voice quiet, serious. "Michael," he said, I think I knew. Knew, I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. Knew what? Knew that Elena wasn't really interested in you, Alex said, his voice hesitant, or at least not in the way she pretended to be. My heart sank. He knew. He had seen it all along, and he hadn't said anything. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, the hurt in my voice palpable. "Why didn't you warn me?" I wasn't sure, Alex said, his voice apologetic. "I didn't want to interfere, and I didn't want to be wrong. Maybe I was just being paranoid. Maybe I was misreading her intentions." "But you weren't," I said, my voice bitter. "You weren't wrong. You saw it. You knew it." "I suspected it," Alex corrected. "But I didn't want to jump to conclusions. And honestly, Michael, I didn't want to hurt you. You seemed so happy. I didn't want to be the one to burst your bubble." Happy. The word felt like a cruel joke. I had been happy, yes. Blissfully, ignorantly happy. Living in a fool's paradise while Elena played me like a puppet. "So you just let me go on believing her lies?" I asked, my voice rising in anger. "You just watched me make a fool of myself?" "No, Michael, it wasn't like that," Alex said, his voice pleading. "I was trying to figure out what was going on. I was trying to protect you in my own way. That's why I kept my distance from Elena. That's why I was cool towards her. I was hoping she would get the message and back off." "But she didn't," I said, my voice laced with sarcasm. "She just kept trying harder, and I just kept falling deeper under her spell." "I know, Michael, I know," Alex said, his voice filled with remorse. "I'm sorry, I should have said something sooner. I messed up." His apology, while sincere, did little to soothe my anger. The hurt was too deep, the betrayal too profound. "So what do we do now?" I asked, my voice weary. "What do we do about Elena?" "I don't know," Alex admitted. "I honestly don't know. What do you want to do?" I thought for a moment, the anger still simmering within me, but now mixed with a growing sense of resolve. I couldn't let her get away with this. I couldn't let her continue to manipulate and deceive people. I needed to confront her. I needed to expose her lies. "I want to confront her," I said, my voice firm, determined. "I want to tell her that I know the truth. I want to know why she did this, why she pretended to love me when all she wanted was you." "Okay," Alex said, his voice supportive. "Then let's do it. Together." Together. The word offered a small measure of comfort. I wasn't alone in this. Alex was on my side. We would face Elena together. "When?" I asked. "Tomorrow," Alex said, his voice decisive. "We'll go see her tomorrow. We'll get this over with." Tomorrow. The thought filled me with a mixture of apprehension and anticipation. Apprehension about the confrontation itself, about facing Elena and her lies, but also anticipation of finally getting the truth, of finally putting an end to this charade. "Okay," I said, my voice stronger now, more confident. "Tomorrow." We hung up, and I sat in silence, staring into the darkness. The anger was still there, but it was starting to be replaced by a sense of purpose, a sense of determination. I would confront Elena. I would demand answers, and I would not let her manipulate me anymore. Tomorrow would be the day the truth came out, the day the illusion shattered. The day I finally broke free from Elena's spell. But little did I know, the truth was even more complicated, more twisted than I could possibly imagine. And the confrontation would be far more devastating than I could ever have anticipated. The next day dawned gray and overcast, mirroring the somber mood that hung over me. I barely slept, my mind replaying the events of the past few months, dissecting every conversation, every interaction with Elena, searching for clues I had missed, for signs of her deception I had ignored. By the time Alex arrived at my apartment, I was a bundle of nerves, my stomach churning with anxiety and anticipation. He looked equally serious, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced by a quiet resolve. "Ready?" he asked, his voice low. "As I'll ever be," I replied, forcing a weak smile. We drove to Elena's apartment in silence, the tension in the car palpable. As we parked outside her building, I felt a wave of dizziness wash over me. This was it, the moment of truth. We walked up to her apartment door and I hesitated for a moment, my hand hovering over the doorbell. "You okay?" Alex asked, his hand resting lightly on my shoulder. "Yeah," I said, taking a deep breath. "Let's do this." I pressed the doorbell and we waited. A few moments later, the door opened and Elena stood before us, her eyes widening in surprise. "Michael? Alex?" she said, her voice laced with confusion. "What are you doing here?" "We need to talk, Elena," I said, my voice firm, unwavering. "Can we come in?" Elena hesitated for a moment, her eyes darting back and forth between me and Alex, a flicker of unease crossing her face. Sure," she said, stepping back to let us in. We entered her apartment and the familiar scent of her perfume filled the air, a bittersweet reminder of the happiness I thought we had shared. The apartment was impeccably tidy, tastefully decorated, just as I remembered it. Elena gestured for us to sit down, and we settled on the sofa facing her. She sat opposite us, her posture tense, her eyes wary. "So," she said, her voice guarded. "What's this about?" I took a deep breath and looked her directly in the eyes. "We know, Elena," I said, my voice clear and steady. "We know that you weren't really in love with me, that you were only using me to get closer to Alex." Elena's face paled, her eyes widening in shock. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. "Don't deny it, Elena," Alex said, his voice calm but firm. "We know the truth. We've seen the way you act around me, the way you've been trying to get my attention. It's been obvious for a while now." Elena remained silent, her gaze fixed on the floor, her face flushed with embarrassment and shame. Finally, she looked up, her eyes filled with tears. "Okay," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Okay. You're right. It's true." The confession hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief that the truth was finally out, sadness at the confirmation of my worst fears, and a lingering anger at her deception. "Why, Elena?" I asked, my voice soft, almost pleading. "Why did you do this? Why did you pretend to love me? Why did you use me?" Elena's tears streamed down her face and she began to sob uncontrollably. I don't know," she choked out, her voice muffled by her tears. I was lonely. I wanted to be loved. And Alex, he's just so perfect." Perfect. The word stung. It was always Alex. He was always better, more desirable, more perfect. Even in Elena's twisted, manipulative scheme, he was the ultimate prize. "So you used me to get to him?" I asked, my voice hardening with anger. "You pretended to love me, you lied to me, you manipulated me, all just to get closer to my brother?" Elena nodded, her head bowed, her shoulders shaking with sobs. "I'm sorry, Michael," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you." "But you did hurt me, Elena," I said, my voice trembling with emotion. "You broke my heart. You shattered my trust. And for what? For a chance. A fleeting chance. To be with my brother, who clearly isn't interested in you." Elena remained silent, her tears flowing freely. And in that moment, looking at her broken, vulnerable form, a strange thing happened. My anger began to dissipate, replaced by a wave of pity. Pity for her loneliness, for her desperation, for her misguided pursuit of Alex. She wasn't just a manipulative user. She was also a deeply flawed, deeply unhappy person, driven by her own insecurities and desires. And in a way, she was a victim too. A victim of her own illusions, her own fantasies. The climax had arrived. The truth was out. But instead of the dramatic explosion I had expected, there was only silence, tears, and a profound sense of sadness. The resolution, I realized, wouldn't be about anger or revenge. It would be about something far more complex, far more emotionally challenging. It would be about forgiveness, or perhaps something even harder, acceptance. The silence stretched on, broken only by Elena's sobs. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not the manipulative deceiver I had imagined, but a broken, vulnerable woman, consumed by her own insecurities and misguided desires. The anger that had been burning within me began to fade, replaced by a strange mix of pity and weariness. Alex, sitting beside me, remained silent, his expression thoughtful, compassionate. He seemed to sense the shift in my emotions, the softening of my anger. After a long pause, I spoke, my voice quiet, almost gentle. "Elena," I said, "I don't understand why you did this. I don't understand why you couldn't just be honest with me, with yourself. But I also understand that you're hurting, that you're lonely, and that you made a mistake." Elena looked up, her eyes red and swollen, her expression a mixture of surprise and gratitude. You understand?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm trying to," I said, sighing. "It's not easy, but I don't want to be angry anymore. I don't want to hate you. It won't change anything. It won't make things better." "I know," Elena said, her voice barely audible. "I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. And I'm truly sorry, Michael. More sorry than you can imagine." "I believe you," I said, meeting her gaze. "I believe you're sorry, but I don't know if I can forgive you. Not yet, anyway." "I don't expect you to," Elena said, shaking her head. "I don't deserve your forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I am sorry, and that I didn't mean to hurt you as much as I did." "Maybe you didn't," I said, sighing again. "But you did. You hurt me deeply, Elena, and it's going to take me a long time to heal from this." "I know," she repeated, her voice filled with remorse. "I know." Another silence descended, heavier this time, laden with unspoken emotions and unresolved feelings. Finally, Alex spoke, his voice gentle but firm. "Elena," he said, I appreciate your apology, and I understand that you were going through a difficult time, but what you did was wrong. You manipulated Michael, you lied to him, you played with his emotions, and that's not okay. Elena nodded, her head bowed. I know, she whispered. I know it wasn't okay. I think, Alex continued, that the best thing for everyone right now is for you to give us some space, to give Michael some space to heal, and to give yourself some space to figure things out. Yes, Elena said, her voice resigned. Yes, you're right, I understand. She looked at me, her eyes pleading. Michael, she said, I really did care about you. In a way, it wasn't all a lie, just the love part. That was a lie. But I did enjoy spending time with you. I did enjoy our conversations. And I am sorry for hurting you. I looked at her, searching her eyes for any trace of deception, any hint of manipulation. But all I saw was genuine remorse, genuine sadness. And in that moment, a strange sense of closure washed over me. The truth was out. The confrontation was over. And while the pain was still there, raw and aching, it was no longer fueled by anger or confusion. It was just pain. The pain of lost love, of shattered illusions, of betrayal. But also perhaps the pain of growth, of understanding, of moving forward. Goodbye, Elena, I said, my voice quiet but firm. Goodbye, Michael, she replied, her voice barely a whisper. We stood up and walked out of her apartment, leaving her alone with her tears and her regrets. As we walked to the car, the grey sky seemed to lighten slightly, a faint glimmer of sunlight breaking through the clouds. It was a small thing, but it felt significant. A symbol of hope, perhaps. A promise of healing, of moving on, of finding light after darkness. The story of Elena, of her lies and her deception, was over. But my story, my life, was not. It was just beginning. And as I looked towards the future, uncertain and unknown as it may be, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. A fragile, tentative hope, but hope nonetheless. The hope of healing, of forgiveness, of finding true love, someday, somewhere, with someone who would see me, truly see me, and love me for who I am, not for who my brother is. The emotional finale wasn't explosive, but quiet, introspective, and ultimately, hopeful. The wound was still fresh, but the healing had begun.